Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. Thomas Forrester's new poet detonates like a beautifully wrapped lemon, transferring shockwaves through Hope Logan and Steffy Forrester that rattle not only their confidence but the veritably stories they've told themselves about love, fidelity, and control, because this poet, unanticipated, unasked, and unbelievable, doesn't just inspire a collection, she exposes the fault lines beneath times of contest and craving. And when Thomas unveils her presence with that familiar blend of intensity and guarded vulnerability, Hope feels the ground cock beneath her bases as if the history has surged forward wearing a new face, while Steffy, poised and sharp as ever, recognizes the peril incontinently, not to the brand but to the delicate emotional balance she's fought to maintain, and the shop becomes a stage where covetousness ignites in 1,000 bitsy gestures, a pause too long at a sketch, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. A question asked too casually, because Thomas's poet isn't simply a woman who inspires outlines and palettes, she's an idea that dares him to choose himself without asking authorization, to produce without reason, and that freedom is intoxicating and intimidating to those who have always believed they knew him stylish. Hope, whose history with Thomas is concentrated with remorse and redemption, finds herself twisting through recollections she allowed she'd learned, recalling nights of admissions and mornings of resoluteness, and the consummation that she isn't the center of his creative macrocosm presently stings further than she expects, kindling a covetousness she doesn't want to enjoy, while Steffy's response is cooler but no less fierce, because she understands power dynamics and she sees how a poet can become a catalyst, how devotion can slip into preoccupation, and she fears the unbelievable choice Thomas might be making, not between women but between performances of himself, the reliable family versus the threat-taking artist, and the B&B shop hums with whispers as staff sense the shift, fabrics cut sharper, deadlines strain, and every regard toward the poet carries a question mark, because who's she to command similar graveness, to pull Thomas out of route, to make him laugh with ease and argue with passion, to challenge him rather than soothe him, and when Thomas presents the first designs born of this collaboration, the room holds its breath as if fading. History in the timber, outlines daring and intimate, colors bold enough to incise the eye, and Hope's heart thuds with the consummation that these designs speak a language she no longer shares with him, while Steffy feels a grudging respect war with defensive instinct, knowing brilliance when she sees it yet unintentional to ignore the cost, because covetousness then's not petty, it's empirical, it asks who gets to be essential to Thomas's life now, and as meetings stretch and tempers flare, the poet's presence becomes a glass reflecting back each woman's deepest fear, Hope's fear of being interchangeable despite her virtuousness, Steffy's fear of losing control despite her strength, and the unbelievable choice looms larger with every sketch projected to the wall, as Thomas is forced to defy what alleviation truly means to him, whether it's tethered to one's injuries or unborn possibility, and in quiet moments between fittings and fittings, he senses the pressure, feels the weight of eyes upon him, and wrestles with guilt for the pain he didn't intend to beget, yet also with the exhilaration he can't deny, because creation has no way felt this alive, and when Hope eventually confronts him amid bolts of fabric and the low churr of machines, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her, the question she asks isn't about the poet at all but about whether he still sees her, whether their participated history still matters, and Thomas answers with honesty that cuts both ways, admitting that it matters deeply but that it cannot be the only thing that defines him, and Steffy, eavesdropping fractions, weigh in with her trademark fire, demanding clarity, boundaries, assurances that the history wouldn't repeat itself, that preoccupation wouldn't faint as art again, and Thomas listens, truly listens, but refuses to be boxed in, asserting that growth means trusting him to make better choices, and the shop seems to exhale and tense all up formerly, because the unbelievable choice crystallizes not as a protestation but as a series of conduct, late nights with the poet refining lines, mornings of calm resoluteness with his family, opinions that place the collection's integrity above particular comfort, and Hope rolls as she watches him walk a path that doesn't circle back to her, scuffling with covetousness that feels like grief, while Steffy recalibrates, shifting from alarm to strategy, deciding whether to support the art despite her misgivings or cover her family by pulling him back, and all the while the poet remains a quiet force, neither villain nor rescuer, simply present, refusing to be reduced to a catalyst, averring on collaboration not subjection, and that turndown unsettles Hope and Steffy utmost of all, because it denies them an easy narrative, and as the launch approaches, the B&B shop transforms into a gauntlet where passions are ameliorated or shattered, where every success sharpens the pang and every reversal offers a transitory comfort, and when the collection eventually debuts to sun that borders on admiration, the shockwaves come inarguable, applause echoing like thunder as Thomas stands altitudinous, altered, and Hope and Steffy are left reeling not just from covetousness but from recognition, that this moment marks a turning point they cannot undo, that Thomas's new poet has done the unbelievable by helping him choose authenticity over conciliation, and in the fate, amid champagne flutes and flashing cameras, Hope finds a quiet resoluteness to review herself beyond her connection to him. Steffy claims a tempered trust in her family's elaboration, and the B&B shop settles into a new meter, still humming, still charged, but ever changed, because covetousness has burned down visions, shock has forged clarity, and the unbelievable choice has been made, not against Hope or Steffy, but for Thomas, and that verity lingers in every confluence and so, a memorial that alleviation, formerly unleashed, can no way be neatly contained. In the days following the triumphant debut, the B&B shop doesn't return to normal so much as it mutates, absorbing the foreshocks of success and emotion into its walls. And Thomas feels it first in the quiet moments when applause has faded and the grim hum of work resumes, because sun is exhilarating but clarity is sobering, and as he walks past racks of garments that now feel like living evidence of his elaboration, he senses Hope and Steffy recalibrating around him, their movements careful, their words measured, as if the old choreography no longer fits, and Hope, especially, moves through the space with a brittle grace that masks a storm of reckoning. Because covetousness, formerly burned, doesn't simply extinguish itself, it demands to be understood, and she finds herself replaying exchanges, ganders, the way Thomas's eyes light up when agitating the poet's ideas, not with passion but with respect, a detail that unsettles her further than anything differently, forcing her to defy the uncomfortable verity that she formerly wanted to be his rescuer, his moral anchor, his redemption story, and now he's saving himself, and that consummation is both freeing and devastating, while Steffy, ever the strategist, shifts into a mode of vigilant acceptance, outwardly probative yet inwardly watchful, because she knows her family's patterns better than anyone and refuses to ignore history indeed as she acknowledges growth, and so the pressure becomes quieter but no less potent, settling into the air like a charged mist, thickening every commerce, as the poet continues her work without fanfare, sketching, fitting, mooting. No way fitting herself into the emotional crossfire yet no way retreating from it either, and that calm continuity becomes its own provocation, because it denies Hope and Steffy the satisfaction of a clear antagonist, forcing them rather to scuffle with their own protrusions, and as weeks pass and orders pour in, the collection's success reshapes Thomas's position within Forrester Creations, elevating his voice, stropping prospects, and with that elevation comes a new kind of pressure. One that tests whether his newfound authenticity can repel scrutiny without slipping into insulation, and in late nights alone in the shop, girdled by half-finished ideas and the ghosts of old failures, Thomas confronts his own dubieties, wondering if this poet represents a chapter or a bolsterer, and whether choosing himself will always mean disappointing those he loves. And when Hope eventually allows herself to sit with him in one of those moments, the discussion is raw and unguarded. Stripped of blameworthiness, as she admits her covetousness not as an armament but as a crack, confessing that seeing him inspired by someone differently made her question her own worth, her own place, and Thomas listens with empathy that's no longer hopeless or protective, offering consolation without pledge, honesty without retreat, explaining that alleviation doesn't abolish connection but it does review it, and Hope leaves that discussion changed, not healed entirely but sustained. Carrying with her the morning of a new narrative where her value isn't measured by his need, while Steffy's reckoning arrives else, in a boardroom battle where figures and vision collide, and she challenges Thomas to articulate not just what he wants to produce but why, demanding to know how he plans to cover himself from old prepossessions, and Thomas answers not with passion alone but with structure, boundaries, a clear-eyed understanding of his limits, and Steffy, hearing this, feels commodity in her casket unclench, realizing that the unbelievable choice he made wasn't reckless but deliberate, and that trust, though fragile, might be rebuilt on these new terms. And yet covetousness still flickers, quieter now but patient, as Hope watches Thomas and the poet share creative longhand she no longer understands, and Steffy observes the ease with which Thomas now navigates authority without seeking her blessing, and both women must defy the subtle grief of losing a interpretation of him they formerly held, indeed as they gain a stronger, nay one, and the B&B shop, ever the silent substantiation, reflects this elaboration in its meter, lower frantic, more focused, as if the space itself has learned to breathe else, and when rumors inescapably swirl, painting the poet as a temptress or puppet master, Hope and Steffy find themselves, to their own surprise, defending her, correcting narratives not out of affection but out of respect for the verity, and that participated defense becomes an unanticipated ground between them, a memorial that contest has always been easier than solidarity, and as seasons shift and new systems impend, Thomas stands at another threshold, apprehensive that alleviation isn't a destination but a process, one that will demand non-stop honesty, and in a quiet moment at the end of a long day, he looks around the shop, at Hope reviewing designs with renewed confidence, at Steffy negotiating deals with sharp assurance, at the poet packing up her sketches with a satisfied nod, and he understands that the real Shockwave was no way about covetousness or choice alone, but about metamorphosis, about allowing change to ripple outward without trying to control its direction, and the unbelievable choice continues to unfold, not as a single act but as a commitment renewed daily, to produce without fear, to love without possession, and to let the history inform rather than immure him, and in that ongoing stir, the B&B shop remains alive, vibrant, and charged, a testament to the verity that alleviation, formerly embraced, doesn't destroy connections but reshapes them, leaving everyone involved altered, exposed, and, in their own uneasy ways, stronger. As time stretches forward, the fate of metamorphosis continues to ripple through the B&B shop in ways both subtle and seismic, because change, formerly invited in, refuses to stay confined to the moment that produced it, and Thomas learns snappily that alleviation carries responsibility, that choosing authenticity isn't a one-time protestation but a discipline that must be rehearsed when fatigue sets in and when praise tempts complacency, and the shop becomes a laboratory not just for fashion but for emotional recalibration, as Hope begins to reclaim her footing with a quiet determination that surprises indeed her, channelizing the pang of covetousness into an unanticipated clarity about her own creative instincts, chancing that distance from Thomas allows her ideas to breathe in ways they no way relatively had ahead, and though the sting hasn't dissolved, it sharpens her focus rather than blurring it, while Steffy, observing this elaboration, jests a rare moment of modesty, fading that her instinct to control issues has frequently masked her fear of chaos, and watching her family navigate success without twisting forces her to review the limits she formerly placed on him, and indeed on herself, and yet the shop remains a gauntlet, because growth doesn't abolish history, and whispers persist among staff and assiduity interposers likewise, assuming about the poet's part, about Thomas's intentions, about whether this period represents a belle époque or a prelude to collapse, and those whispers reach Hope late at night when mistrustfulness creeps in, reach Steffy during accommodations when rivals probe for weakness, and reach Thomas in moments of solitariness when the weight of anticipation presses down, and it's in those moments that the poet's true impact becomes clearer, not as a romantic distraction or manipulative force, but as a steady presence who refuses to share in drama, who challenges Thomas when his ideas drift toward indulgence, who steps back when credit is misdirected, and who insists that collaboration means collective responsibility, and this asseveration unsettles the old dynamics, because it denies everyone the comfort of familiar patterns, and when Hope and the poet eventually partake an unguarded discussion amid bolts of fabric and untreated ends, the exchange is awkward but honest, stripped of contest, as Hope admits her fear of being transcended and the poet responds not with guard but with empathy, admitting the complicated heritage Thomas carries and her own disinclination to be defined by it, and that discussion doesn't dissolve pressure but reframes it, allowing Hope to see the poet not as a trouble but as a boundary, a memorial that Thomas's alleviation no longer feeds on emotional trap, and Steffy's turning point comes latterly, during an extremity that tests everything they've rebuilt, when a critical payload is delayed and investors fear, and the pressure threatens to pull Thomas back into old habits of preoccupation and control, and Steffy watches nearly, ready to intermediate, but Thomas surprises her by delegating, by trusting his platoon, by stepping down long enough to recapture perspective, and in that restraint she sees evidence of lasting change, and commodity in her shifts, not into eyeless faith but into measured confidence, and the shop weathers the storm, arising stronger, more cohesive, and the success that follows feels earned rather than frantic, and yet beneath these palms lies an turnabout of grief, because metamorphosis frequently requires letting go of narratives that formerly handed comfort, and hope mourns the interpretation of Thomas who formerly demanded her blessing, indeed as she celebrates the man he's getting, and Steffy grieves the certainty she formerly applied as his protection, indeed as she respects his autonomy, and Thomas himself grieves the times lost to tone, mistrustfulness and destructive choices, admitting that growth does end abolish consequences, and the unbelievable choice he made continues to demand immolation, particularly when temptation arises in the form of assiduity accolades and attractive offers that promise ease at the expenditure of integrity, and in refusing those lanes, he solidifies a new identity embedded not in redemption bends or battles but in thickness, and the B&B shop reflects this development, its energy less unpredictable, more purposeful, as brigades unite with renewed trust, and as seasons pass and collections evolve, the original shockwaves settle into a steady hum, not because the impact has faded but because everyone has learned how to move within it, and Hope finds herself mentoring youngish contrivers, her confidence predicated not in comparison but in donation, and Steffy expands the brand's vision with calculated boldness, her leadership tempered by hearkening, and the poet, having fulfilled her part without overstaying it, prepares to step back, leaving behind not a void but a frame that sustains itself, and her departure, when it comes, is quiet and regardful, marked by gratefulness rather than drama, and in that quietness lies the final evidence that alleviation doesn't need to cleave to be meaningful, and Thomas, watching her go, feels neither fear nor remorse, only a calm acknowledgement of check, and as he turns back to the shop, to Hope's concentrated determination, to Steffi's steady command, to the living meter of creation around him, he understands that the true shock was no way about covetousness alone but about awakening, about choosing growth indeed when it unsettles those closest to you, and the unbelievable choice continues to echo not as contestation but as precedent, a memorial that courage reshapes ecosystems, and the B&B shop stands as its monument, alive with stories not of contest undone but of individualities reclaimed. And in that ongoing elaboration, Hope, Steffy, and Thomas remain set not by old injuries but by a participated adaptability, altered yet enduring, as the vestments of their lives weave forward into commodity changeable, honest, and incontrovertibly real. As the quiet left by the poet's departure settles into the B&B shop, it doesn't feel empty but commodious, like a room cleared after a storm where the air still hums with energy, and Thomas senses that this is the most dangerous and liberating phase of all, because without a single figure to anchor his alleviation, he must now prove, to himself further than anyone, that the growth he claimed is real, sustainable, and not dependent on reflection through another's eyes, and this consummation follows him through long mornings reviewing sketches and late nights pacing between mannequins, as Hope and Steffy continue to circumvent him in recently defined ways, each carrying her own quiet metamorphosis, because Hope, having rebuilt her confidence piece by piece, now approaches her work with a immutability that draws attention without demanding it, her design speaking with a wimpiness that's no longer repentant, and Thomas notices this shift with a blend of admiration and melancholy, understanding that what formerly bound them has evolved into commodity lower combustive but more honest, and Steffy, meanwhile, moves through the shop with stoned authority, her opinions decisive yet less rigid, as if witnessing her family's elaboration has loosened her grip on the belief that control is the only safeguard against chaos, and the three of them find themselves participating space without the constant turnabout of pressure that formerly defined their relations, though the history still lingers like a faint echo, reminding them that peace is end obliviousness but conscious restraint, and when an unanticipated occasion arises, a high-profile transnational collaboration that would place Thomas's work under a harsher, more enduring limelight, the old dynamics hang to resurface, because similar exposure has historically been both his dream and his death, and Hope feels a flicker of concern she tries not to label as protectiveness, while Steffy incontinently begins assessing pitfalls, her instincts glaring, and Thomas, standing at the center of their responses, recognizes the familiar pull to either seek consolation or revolutionary against it, and rather chooses a third path, inviting both women into the decision-making process without surrendering his autonomy, A move that disarms them both, because it signals trust without reliance, and the shop buzzes with renewed intensity as medications begin, yet this time the energy feels predicated rather than frantic, and as deadlines impend and pressure mounts, Thomas is tested constantly, brazened with reviews that question his maturity, his thickness, his capability to sustain invention without emotional volatility, and each notice lands like a challenge to the very choice he made months agone, forcing him to respond not with guard but with discipline, and Hope watches this unfold with quiet pride, realizing that her covetousness has completely converted into respect, not because she no longer cares but because she eventually understands that minding doesn't bear possession, and Steffy, witnessing Thomas navigate accommodations without twisting, just a subtle shift from alert to cooperation, allowing herself to calculate on his judgment rather than stamp it, and yet the unbelievable choice continues to prize its price, particularly when the assiduity begins to crop Hope and Thomas against each other creatively, framing their resemblance successes as a contest revived, and captions hang to reignite old precariousness, pushing Hope to defy whether she's truly free of comparison or simply better at hiding it, and in a moment of vulnerability, she confides in Steffy, admitting that independence doesn't immunize bone against mistrustfulness, and Steffy, surprising herself